Hi, everyone, and welcome to Ms. Information, a podcast where we dish about science. I'm Mindi Messmer, and I'm here with Dr. Nora Traviss. If you want more information about us, you can go to our Patreon site at patreon.com/nhscience or our website at nhscience.org. Let's dish. Hi, I'm Mindi Messmer. I'm here today with Nora Traviss, Dr. Nora Traviss, and we're going to talk about some news items that are science-related here. And the first one I wanted to talk about, Nora, was this amazing discovery that we came across this week that this polluter, Saint Gobain Performance Plastics, that's in Merrimack, although they were required to install some treatment on their air emissions, that's resulted in polluting probably about 100 square miles of aquifer here in New Hampshire, the drinking water. They installed an illegal bypass. We just kind of happened to find a letter of deficiency that the state issued, and it was widely picked up by, I think, 6 or 7 press outlets here in New Hampshire this past week. But, you know, it's another example of how the biggest polluter in our state that are putting out these air emissions, polluting our drinking water, is being enabled by our state regulators to continue doing that. I mean, the people of Merrimack are so frustrated, that area, because they've been waiting literally for years to have something be put in place. And it feels like the rug keeps getting pulled out from underneath them. So this is a really important issue.
Yeah, I think it's important, for folks in the rest of the state. A lot of folks don't know about the PFAS contamination that you're referring to, perfluoroalkyl substances, which are these substances that go into the manufacture of Teflon. And they've been known for decades to be harmful to human health. They're endocrine disruptors, which means that they interfere with hormones. They're, significantly associated with different kinds of cancers that, as you know, like testicular cancer and kidney cancer. And so, Saint Gobain is a manufacturer that works with PFAS, and there's just been this sort of ongoing back and forth with trying to, minimize those emissions. And as you rightly point out, the air emissions have covered, I think the Environmental Protection Agency has said there's a 65 square mile area where drinking water is contaminated. And, this has been found out over time. So the folks that are most immediately impacted in Merrimack, as you know, are just, looking for some, swifter resolution. And it's a serious public health and environmental health issue, which, that's kind of why we're here to talk about these things that not a lot of other people know about.
Yeah, I mean, the 65 square mile thing was an estimate based on what was going on before New Hampshire passed these really strict environmental regulations on 4 of the PFAS chemicals. We know there's 9,200 of what they call these forever chemicals. And so we're yet to see how far those impacts really extend. We know that, there's a certain level of exposure the state of New Hampshire has determined to be safe. And there are many residents, even this week, I was notified by a resident in Bedford whose private well has been really impacted by these chemicals. I told them not to drink their water. This is happening all over Derry, all over Londonderry, Bedford, now Hudson, Merrimack, Litchfield, some parts of Manchester. It is a huge issue. And, forever chemicals, once they get into the ground and into your body, we don't know how to get them out. So the best thing is...
these are, it's just, so important, I think, that the information, the facts, the reality sort of on the ground gets out there, because you bring up a really good point. When EPA did the study, they're working with whatever information they had at that time, and science evolves. Yes. And so we're learning. What's that?
We hope so.
You hope. Yeah. Well, one of the interesting things you certainly have a lot of experience in, because you're, one of the few people that has done work both as a legislator, so you've done work on the policy side, on in the political arena, but you're also a scientist. And so most scientists like myself, we kind of stay over in our little science world and we present facts, and then we sort of throw those facts into the policy arena, and then folks figure it out, right? They argue and decide what policy to make on these facts. But as things evolve in our society, it's becoming more complicated to do that because of misinformation and disinformation, right? That's why we're calling ourselves
Yeah.
misinformation, because it's a little pun there on words, but trying to be an outlet to get facts out there. I'm a scientist. I study aerosols, primarily air pollution from combustion, like wood and biofuels. But these types of issues, factory emissions, they're all the same. And how particles travel, how pollutants travel, is certainly in my wheelhouse. And you're right. 65 square miles is probably the first best guess and good estimate, but there's been, more updates to the science since. And as you're getting feedback, as the state gets feedback from residents, maybe in 100 square miles, we still don't really know the true impact. And the fact that people are calling up and saying that their well water is contaminated with PFAS seems to indicate this is a bigger problem, and it's not just Merrimack. It's southern New Hampshire, and so that definitely means this needs to be investigated more seriously, and so that we can protect public health.
Right. So the little plug here, if you want to hear more information about this story and others, you can go to our website at nhscience.org. You can also follow us on Facebook. We have a Facebook page, New Hampshire Science and Public Health. And you mentioned a little bit, you sort of talked about something, and we want to get into a tiny bit here about your other work that, maybe most people, I didn't know about it till I started talking to you a few years ago, is your wood smoke work. So you want to talk about that a little bit and what's going on. There's some upcoming event next week, and so maybe you can just let people know about that also.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So a lot of my what I call bread and butter research is in the area of renewable fuels combustion and what that means. And in New England, we have exceptionally high rates of asthma and COPD, and one understudied area is wood smoke. And it's
that's
very
like the
natural.
wood coming out of your fireplace and your wood stove, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, and it's not, it's the concern is mainly from fireplaces. I'm really glad you brought that up, because that is where you get the least amount of good combustion of wood. And also, these antique wood stoves that everybody loves and everybody wants to hold on to, but they're not really efficient at burning. And so what happens is you've got high levels of what's called particulate matter. And, it's also wood smoke. That's what we refer to it. But it's the size of the particle that we're concerned about. And the small particles infiltrate the lungs, but they can also infiltrate the bloodstream and get to every organ, even, your liver, your heart. There's a high correlation between stroke and arrhythmia and heart attack from excess exposure to particulate matter. And so we're trying to, with my work in a citizen science project that's also been helped by EPA over the years, to engage citizens in understanding the concentrations in real time. So they deploy instruments that we help them set up, and then also doing education on good wood storage practices, good burn practices, because we also recognize that New England has a lot of trees, and trees are a renewable resource. I try to promote that we're not anti-wood, but here's what you can do to burn wood safely. And it's really critical for our valley communities in New England that get these air inversions where pollutants can build up. So next week I'm talking at a regional conference with folks from EPA and New England states, so Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maine, Vermont, Connecticut, Department of Environmental Protection representatives, and some other scientists and tribal nations. And, we collaborate and share best practices. And I hope to report on that in the future. So to give people, concrete actions on what they can do.
Absolutely. So important. I mean, I think I've heard that New Hampshire has been called like the tailpipe of New England or something. And that, our high children,
there's a lot going on.
High rates of asthma in children and things like that. So that's
there is a lot going on and lots for us to talk about, because again, these issues that really impact the day-to-day health of people, it's stuff that doesn't really get talked about. And we hope to arm people with real information.
Yeah. Again, so if you want to learn more about Dr. Traviss's wood smoke work, you can go to our website at nhscience.org. All right, so we wanted to talk a little bit about why we started this podcast, why me and Dr. Nora Traviss is here, are really driven to do something like this. And I think for me anyway, Nora, it started out 5 or 6 years ago when you showed up at the House to support one of the pieces of legislation I was working on. And I was so thankful that you did that, because oftentimes in policy making and science-based policy things that happen, especially here in New Hampshire, there isn't really a voice of science. And I found that it was so important for me as a scientist to be involved in policy. And now, fast forward to where we are now, we're in the middle of this global pandemic, and it seems like all the time things get worse. And, you and I know Nora have talked about, we just feel like we're watching this slow motion car crash happening because we see things happening that really don't make sense to us, people addressing things in ways that we don't think make sense. We started this New Hampshire Science and Public Health Task Force at the beginning of the pandemic. We got amazing support from so many medical professionals here in the state of New Hampshire and scientists who really care about things. So we just thought, at least for me, this was a perfect venue to just really start to get the word out, to get our words out, to have a vehicle for us to talk about how important it is to use science to guide us here, especially now when there's so much misinformation coming at us from all different directions. How do you think for you, Nora, this is why you decided to do this podcast with me?
Well, I think you hit on a lot of the points, and it's nice to go back and to reflect sort of our journey separate and then together. As you know, I worked in industry for many, many years.
Me too.
Yeah, right. It's like, people think, Dr. Nora Traviss, you live in Ivory Tower or whatever. And it's like, no, actually, I've been in emergency response teams, as you have. I've worked for different chemical industries. I absolutely understand the need for modern products, but also understand the ways that we can reduce risk, right? So it's a constant tension. And I, made a midlife career change, even though technically I'm only 39. Joke, insert joke there.
I was going to say,
I had a lot of experience, sort of practical chemical exposure assessment, and I went back for my doctorate to get the research-based experience and the more scholarly experience, and transitioned into becoming a research scientist in exposure assessment of particulate matter from combustion of biofuels. And, it's a different world. It is a completely different world to be immersed in research. And we need scientists that are actually immersed in that world, right? Separate from politics. We're really following rigorous protocols. We're testing hypotheses. We're collecting data. And I kind of sat in that world for a really long time. And then I took a couple steps back to see, well, all this data is great, but what are we doing with it, right? Because I guess coming from that place of real experience, like I want to see the data in a way be applied. And so seeing your work at the time, looking at PFAS contamination in drinking water, looking at exposures and health effects to perfluoroalkyl substances, Teflon-related substances, looking at arsenic, which is a big problem in drinking water in our state. I was really compelled. I could see that, there was this need for folks to bring scientists to sort of step out of that comfort zone of the just staying in our wheelhouse, because if we're just collecting data and it's sitting on a shelf, that's not really helping the public. And as someone who really had that more one-on-one relationship with workers, I still remember the days when workers would come up to me and be like, we're working with the substance. Am I going to get cancer in 30 years? And how hard it is to really answer those questions. And so for me, it was natural to kind of come back and be in the space with you to let's try to get the science out there. There's a lot of knowledge, and it's often not communicated, and we don't have any control about that, but we can communicate our expertise.
Yeah, I think that's really important. The real world experience that you talk about is so important, because you and I probably have some war stories we could share. Like I could talk about the time I got sprayed from an overfilling tanker of nitric acid all over my body while I was sampling groundwater. And then it was a spill that we had to address. There's things like that real world experience that we bring to this. So we know, when the pesticide manufacturers are talking about, that was one of the big things the first time I met you, I think, Nora, was when we were trying to push through some legislation to control the spraying of pesticides on daycares and elementary schools.
Oh, yeah.
And you remember those lobbyists that came in and they were like, there's nothing wrong here. Don't worry about those pesticide guys. They have no increased risk of cancer. And we were kind of like, yeah.
It was really scary. I think, and I remember bringing my students to that testimony.
Yes.
And first of all, there's plenty of data on how easy it is to do integrated pest management, and particularly, for daycares, right? This is just like low hanging fruit to not have Roundup and pesticides at a daycare with kids crawling around on the ground.
Right? Doesn't it make sense?
But you remember they brought in a young woman scientist, and she sat down and we had those experts. I testified, an EPA poison control specialist who wrote a textbook on childhood poisonings testified to reduce pesticides. And this young woman scientist, came in and said, yeah, my kids play in the lawn with Roundup. They're fine. And that really, to me, was so shocking at the power. They had an whole army of lobbyists come into little old New Hampshire in that 40 by 40 foot room with no seat.
Packed in there. And it was eye-opening. It was really eye-opening. Yeah. So, and that's why we need an army of people like you and me on the other side, fighting this. But what I also really was compelling to me was your students coming in, actually. I think you do a wonderful service to the students by having them involved in these. And there's been a couple of things along the way. I've really appreciated the ability to interact with your students and other students. I think, in the citizen science project you talk about with the wood smoke, that means that people are contributing data to your project. That means you and I sitting in our home, and somebody else that has a wood stove, they may have some kind of piece of equipment on their roof or in their garage that they're allowing us to collect samples. It is so important. And that gets people to understand how important all this work is, too. If they're, an integral part of the science collection, it makes it really much more impactful. And we developed this group of people to fight the forces of the lobbyists on the other side. I had a conversation with Bonnie Bracey Sutton last week, who's she does a lot of work on educating science. And she talked about how important it was in her community, which was in Southwest DC, for the moms to be involved in helping her set up the science projects, from everything like just providing the lunch for the kids on a field trip that made them happy about being on the science field trip, to being involved in creating the project itself. This kind of citizen science is so important to help develop advocacy.
I think you're right, and it's critical. It's been sort of become I moved out of like the bench. I used to do, and it's not that I don't love doing toxicology and more, field and bench scale type, traditional, whatever you want to call it, in the lab and in the field science. But citizen science is important because, as you said, like when folks are collecting the data themselves, they see also how hard science is. And, over like the past couple decades, I think I call it the CSI phenomenon, right? Everyone like watches these like crime scene investigations type shows and they think you get an answer in an hour. That's not how science works. It's really tough. It's a lot of trial and error before we can see the signal from the noise. And when folks are actually collecting the data themselves, they go, oh, wow, all right, like this, I get it. I get why, scientists, it's just hard and it's messy and it's not neat and clean and solved fast. And so that's a way, and also it's a way for folks to participate, to increase their agency. And so in other words, science isn't magic, right? I mean, it's not like stuff that not all of us, it's stuff any of us can do and contribute to, but it is hard. And so we do need experts. We do need experts at the end of the day to kind of make sense of it all.
And you mentioned something important too, the messiness of science. That is so important for everyone to understand, which is why we need everyone's help, because that's exactly where the lobbyists focus, on the messiness and the ability to sort of pick apart, use some arguments to pick apart some of the facts and the evidence that we try to present. So the more people on our side helping us out to make it less messy.
Yeah. Scientists always debate, and this is what makes me laugh when people are like, oh, well, that's kind of natural. Scientists are always like debating. But, to your point about lobbyists and folks that are kind of in that realm that are scientists, you could still go out and find a scientist today that's going to tell you smoking doesn't cause cancer and that smoking will cause hormesis and make you feel, it actually is good for you. Like those people exist. Yeah. And now we would look at those people 20, 30 years later and go, oh my God, you're like not even credible, but they exist. And so those people exist now, but because it's stuff that we don't have 30 years experience on, for some reason people are apt to go, oh, maybe they're onto something. And lobbyists use that to their advantage.
Absolutely. And so what we're going to try to do in this podcast is bring important subject matter to highlight in our podcast. Things like lead poisoning in New Hampshire. Our children are still being poisoned by lead in New Hampshire. It's a critical issue that we need to address. We're going to bring some people in to talk about COVID-19 and sort of the public healthcare system, climate change, and just, bring a variety of people in to speak to us about science and misinformation. So much of what is being, what we're all being exposed to right now with this pandemic and how important it is for us to talk about science. So we're hoping that you'll join us. Our website is nhscience.org to get more information about us. If you want to support our podcast, it'd be great if you went to patreon.com/NH And if you could put down $5 or $10 a month, that would be so helpful in helping us bring this kind of content to you and to the rest of the people here who are science supporters. Anything else you want to say in closing, Nora, before we head out to our next set of guests?
I'm excited about the guests that you've got lined up for the really near future, Mindy, but also just to put out there that we do science. Like you and I
Yes.
actually all conduct science. So any kind of funding for Patreon and to our website helps us do citizen science, which goes towards supplies, which goes towards getting student help, which goes towards collecting data, because science actually costs money, and sometimes environmental health science, it's difficult to get that kind of support. So we not only talk about science, but we do science. So I wanted to add that.
Very important. And you may not see it because it does take a little while and it is a little messy. And we are, like Dr. Traviss said, we are right now in the midst of creating science, and your support would be so helpful in allowing us to continue to do that.